of anything they have to offer me, right? It's like, get over yourself, Mark. You've got to.
I believe if we could be indivisible, we would be indestructible. And
hype after this. I don't mean to ask you to put you on the spot to say, tell us what's going to happen in the future, but tell us what's going to happen in the future.
Good.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Keep Leading Live. I'm Eddie Turner, the Leadership Accelerator. I work with emerging and established leaders who want to excel and exceed expectations. The Keep Leading podcast is dedicated to leadership development and insights. If you are joining this session, let us know you're here. Hit the comments in the chat to tell us who you are, where you're from. I don't always see everything depending on the platform that passes over your comments, but if I see it, we will acknowledge it. We want you to be engaged in this discussion. Ask questions. If you're not following my guests online, you're going to want to do so. Follow her on social media, book her to come give a speech to your organization, and definitely pick up the new book we're going to be talking about. We're broadcasting on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, so we'd love to hear from you, no matter which platform you're coming to the session from. Now, our world has changed. And since our world has changed, leaders must change. Generational and demographic workplace compositions around the world look different than they've ever looked before. This means there's a high probability that if you are leading someone who is not like you. Since you're not leading someone like you, you might need to recalibrate your thought process on leadership, get new solutions and new strategies. Where can you look? My guest today has written a book that gives the solution, gives answers that all leaders can benefit from. Her new international best-selling book is entitled Allied Leadership, Leading People Not Like You. And this book is written by, in fact, that word ally is an acronym, and it's written by Stephanie Chung. Stephanie is not just an author. She's a force of strategic innovation. She's a beacon of change and a titan in the world of business growth and human capital management. Stephanie is the former chief growth officer for Wheels Up. She's the first African-American to lead a private jet company. She is one of Adweek's women trailblazers. Ebony listed her on the Power 100 list. Rob Report says she's one of 23 Black visionaries who are changing the luxury world. She's been celebrated in publications such as Forbes, Barron's, Worth, Essence, DCEO magazine, and her insights have appeared in the pages of Inc. and Black Enterprise magazine. I am so excited to welcome my friend, Stephanie Chung. Stephanie, welcome to the Keep Leading podcast.
Thank you, Eddie. It's so good to be here. And, it's always, whenever you hear your own accolades, it's like you're at your own funeral, right? You're like hearing accolades thinking, wow, that's interesting. Okay. So anyways, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm really excited to be here with you.
Oh no, this ain't no funeral. We're gonna give you your flowers now while you're alive and get to celebrate you. You
My
are a big
birthday is
deal.
off.
Hey, listen, it's talking about flowers and celebrating and making sure we do it now. You know, when I met you 6 or so years ago,
It's a long
uh,
time ago.
it's a
Yeah.
day I will not forget. And
Oh.
a moment that I will not forget is this.
Oh my goodness, that's right. I remember we took that picture. Oh my God. Look at my hair. It was crazy.
This was pretty special because all these incredible people in this photo. You look sensational as always. You are always styling. The people in this photo are very special to us. Some really high level achievers,
Yeah.
and of course, Father John, one of the hidden figures who we
Yeah.
didn't see in the movie, but who's in the book. His story was so compelling, and we just met some great people that day. So I just wanted to share this memory, this throwback for you and I.
What a great throwback. Oh my goodness. And we were in Colorado, I think, from what I remember,
We
right? We're
were,
in the woods
yes.
and out. Yeah, it
You
was
see those mountains
excellent.
behind us, although the sun is shining. But yes, you're right. We were in Colorado for
That
the
was
meet.
wonderful. That was wonderful. Yes, yes. I remember the day we took that picture and just all the stuff that was going on. What a great, thank you. What a blessing. Thank you for showing that. That was a long time ago. Man.
Yes, thank you. It's my pleasure. Absolutely. Well, tell me what I missed about you and your sensational background.
Okay. Well, you know what? Gosh, I always start with at the beginning, right? Because you read off my accomplishments, but where it all started is my dad was a master sergeant in the US Air Force. And so I grew up a military kid and I grew up listening to planes take off and land my entire life. So the good thing about that is I knew early on what I wanted to do, right? So I wanted to work in aviation. That was my lifelong dream as a little girl. And so really the very first job I had was parking planes and loading luggage at the Boston Logan Airport, and loved that job. If I could make a decent amount of money, I'd still be working there. And then from there I would go upstairs and check people in at the ticket counter. And so, as they were boarding their flights, et cetera. So I absolutely loved that job. I was young, I was single, I didn't, have any kids yet. And everybody that I worked with was in that same bucket. So we would travel the world, go on vacations because you could fly anywhere for free. And it was just such an amazing time. But it also taught me so much. It taught me about how to, work in an operation of a big company and so on and so forth. But it also, because I got to travel so much, as an adult, right? I traveled a lot as a child, just being a military kid, but I got to learn and meet about different people and how to communicate with different people. And, little did I know that would be the catalyst that would then propel my career and get me really sitting here talking to you about, a book that I wrote that was really a, testament of all the things I had to learn in order to be able to lead at a high level, and especially lead people who were nothing like me. So that's the only other thing I would say. And then, of course, I'm married to the same guy for 35 years. We have a daughter who's 33. Yeah, that is a blessing. And so I always joke around and say, Eddie, I'm a Black woman married to a Japanese guy. We have a Chinese last name, and I grew up in an all white male industry. So everything I've written in that book comes from true life experience. And so I wouldn't have changed not one single second of any of that, because it got me where I am today. So
sensational. Well, tell us a little bit more about the reason you wrote the book, in addition to your beautiful background that you share with us, and how you're applying the strategies from Allied Leadership, how to lead people who are not like you.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because the reason why I wrote the book, originally, I was asked by my speakers bureau, like, hey, people are asking, does Stephanie have a book? They hire me to speak. I come and then they want to know, does she have a book? Does she have anything else? And so, when my speakers bureau came to me, I remember, I was a working executive. We were, really busy at the job. And plus I still had the speaking going on, plus being a mom and a wife. And I just remember thinking, there is no way I'm going to write. I do not have time to write a book. But then everything else settled down. And I really started to observe where our country was headed and where I thought there was some challenges that I could add some value, just because of my work experience and my life experience, quite frankly. And so that's what really started to prompt me to think about it, pray about it, and figure out, if I was to write a book, what do I care enough about to really invest the time, energy, effort, and resources that were going to be needed. And at the end of the day, Eddie, what it came down to is I have a heart just like you do for leaders. We know that leadership is a tough job. And so, the way that I wanted to give back was to just use my experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as to what can I do to contribute to really help leaders in this day and age of what's struggling. So when you think of the landscape at work right now, and this is throughout the globe, but I'll focus primarily on the United States. We've got 5, soon to be 6 generations working. That is unheard of. That means the employee age is anywhere from 16 to 75. And so you and I both know that the way that a Zoomer thinks is very different than a way that a Boomer thinks. And millennials think differently than Gen X, and just all that. So all the different intergenerations that are working can be very, very challenging because they have different expectations, perspectives, wants, needs, desires, work ethics, everything. So that I saw was, issue number 1, right? Issue number 2, and not really, I shouldn't say issue in a negative way, but just here's the scenarios that leaders are dealing with. The other part of it is, here in the United States, women are the majority of the country's population. We actually work differently, lead differently, communicate differently. So that adds a different dynamic to the workplace as well. Then you couple in all the ethnic demographics that are changing, right? So the ethnic groups, the Black, the Asian, the Hispanic groups are all growing. The non-ethnic group continues to shrink. That changes the dynamic in the workplace. And then that's not even, you'd have to add in different able-bodied folks, or our colleagues from the LGBTQ plus community, or people who have different neurodiversities. And so the list goes on and on. That's the climate that is today's modern workforce. And so my heart was really to work with leaders and give them a tool, if you will, to say, listen, you, no matter who you are, no matter what race, creed, gender, doesn't matter who you are, if you're a leader, just like you said in the opening, you will be leading people who are not like you. And so I created the book to give you tools and shortcuts of things that I did to be successful, in hopes that it would allow leaders to be able to be successful in their journey as well. Because at the end of the day, I come from a primarily white male dominated space. So I was the lonely only for many, many, many years. And, there's a lot of lessons that come out of that. And yet I was still able to hit the highest level, an officer of a publicly held company, but it didn't come without a lot of lessons learned. And so that's really what the book is all about. There is no shame, no beating people up, none of that stuff. This book is really all about how do you lead people who are not like you. And I give you some really helpful hints on how to do that.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to learning a little bit about that. And we have Esra Miller, who has joined us, who I recently met a couple of weeks ago. She's tuning in all the way from Istanbul, if my memory serves me correctly.
Wonderful.
So thank you, Ezra. She says this is a great topic. We appreciate you joining us and letting us know you're here and weighing in on the conversation. Now, this word ally, I read that it stands for, it's an acronym. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, what ally leadership is?
Absolutely. So you're right. It's an acronym, and it stands for ask, listen, learn, and then you take action. So that's what ally is. And the reason why that's important is I could have labeled the book Allyship, how to lead people who are not like you, but that's not what I was going for. Ally acronym, you have to ask, listen, learn, and then you take action as a leader. So ally leadership is the reason why I named it that way. And the probably the most important part of that whole thing, Eddie, is the reason why that was so prevalent for me is, I speak, I speak for a living, right? So I go and speak to big companies, usually Fortune 100 is usually my audience. And whenever I'm out speaking, and I primarily speak to leaders, inevitably someone will come up to me and say, oh man, like this is great. I'm an ally, especially men will say, I'm an ally. I'm married. I've got 3 daughters. Like I'm an ally. And then my comeback is always the same thing, Eddie. I will always say, that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. Tell me what it is that you've done this week to show your allyship.
Mm.
And then I get crickets.
Good question.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay,
then,
statement.
there's then people don't have any receipts to back up their claim. And so one of the things that I really try to communicate in the book is you can't just call yourself an ally. This isn't a participation trophy, right? It's not like, oh, I'm an ally. Well, no. You're only an ally, not if you call yourself an ally, but if somebody else calls you an ally, right? You can't
Yes.
say, I can't say, oh, I'm a nice person. Like, I can't say that. You can say I'm a nice person, but I can't say it. And the same is true for allies. Allies have to realize that people who see you as an ally, they can say you're an ally, but that's not something you can say yourself. And so I really wanted to kind of, mark my territory, if you will, with that particular statement, because it's really time as leaders that we level up. And the only way that anyone will classify you as an ally is if they see you take action. That's the only way it's going to happen. So you can't, just poof, I'm an ally. That doesn't work that way. When you see something, do you say something? Do you know what to say? Do you know how to say it? All of these things is what makes you an ally. It's not just because you chose to say I'm an ally. It's a very cool talking point, but we're all in a society where people's BS monitors are like off the chain, right? So nobody wants to hear you say something and not be able to back it up with cold, hard facts. Don't even get me going on this subject, Eddie.
Tell us how you really feel, Stephanie.
Exactly. So that's what this book's about,
Yeah. So you're basically saying, hey, don't self-anoint yourself as an ally.
Yes.
Let someone else call you an ally.
Absolutely.
And you're only going to call you one if you're acting like one.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Because, I talk about this a lot in the book. There are times, and we've all been in this situation, right? So this isn't just a black and white issue or male and female issue or gay or straight issue. Everybody's been in this situation where something happens and you don't feel comfortable with maybe the comment that was said or the joke that was told or what have you. And so what true allies do is they actually address it right then and there. But what tends to happen is people will go, well, I don't want to be a part of this conversation. So they'll get up and they'll leave. Well, the truth is you don't get any street credit for that, for getting up and leaving, right? Because you didn't actually take any action. Yes, you leaving was an act, but maybe not the act of courage that we're looking for, right? But what you have to do when you're leading is, this is a courageous job. You got to lean in, right? Leadership is not for the faint at heart. And so when you have those situations, you must do something. You have to take action. You got to ask, you got to listen, you got to learn, and then you got to take action. And so whether that's you as a man leading a woman, or a woman leading a man, or leading somebody from a different generation, different race, different sexual orientation, whatever, we've all got plenty of opportunity to be able to use our voice for good, and therefore, start to earn that right of being called an ally.
And I like the way you mentioned that. We earn
it.
This right to be called an ally.
And may I go one step further, Eddie, to tell you that
please.
EARN is actually an acronym as well. So, EARN stands for, as leaders, we have to first establish an environment where everybody feels seen, appreciated, and psychologically safe. That's the E. Then we have to assure alignment. So as leaders, we need to make sure that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. What business are we in? Why are we here? How does what I do, if I'm an employee, impact what we do as a business? So as a leader, we have to make sure that the environment we've established, everybody is assured of we're all in alignment as to why we're here. The R stands for, as leaders, we have to rally the troops, right? You get a bunch of people who know why they're here, who have a psychologically safe environment, and you rally them to one cause, Eddie, they are unstoppable, right? So you've got to know how to rally the troops. And then I come from aviation, right? So you have to navigate the narrows. And basically what that means is you got to know where you're going, why you're going, how you're going to get there, when you're supposed to be there. You have to be able to track and measure and monitor all of that stuff as well. And so I go a lot more into detail in the book, but that's how you earn the ability to be called an ally.
Excellent. Thank you for letting us know it requires work, that you earn it, and giving us acronyms to show us the steps to get there.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. Well, I want to pause just for a moment to acknowledge my sponsor of the Keep Leading podcast. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We're going to pick back up on that thread in just a moment. If a single company's indecision can cost an organization $10,000 to $1 million, imagine the potential financial impact when more individuals are added to this indecision equation. It can spiral out of control very quickly. The answer is to use Decision X. Decision X is a bespoke, on-demand service designed to help your leaders overcome indecision and move forward with their work. Visit Papillon MDC and discover how you can help your team get unstuck, shift perspectives, and advance today. Now, Stephanie, I want to just jump back and pull on that thread a little bit more as you define that for us. I think that's fascinating about what ally leadership is. But now that we know what it is and how it's earned, is that also basically the answer as to how we become that ally leader, or is more involved?
Yeah, so there's more involved, right? Because there's all the different steps that you have to do, but we talk about that in the book. And I actually usually lay out a story as well to drive home the point. And then I do, honestly too, Eddie, I go and hit those topics that a lot of us as leaders, leading is tough, and trying to think about what your average leader has to think about today, right? So the average leader today, and I'm talking about if you're leading in marketplace, not necessarily if you're leading in, ministry or nonprofits or what have you, though they have the same challenges. But those of us leading in corporate America, we have to be focused on customer retention, customer growth, right? Employee retention. How do we attract, top talent? And then we also have to be concerned about all the stuff that's going on globally, global supply chain issues, what wars are happening, how is that going to impact my business, my product? Is there a demand for my product? Is not a demand for the product? What's the stock market doing? There's all kind of things we have to think about. And now on top of it, we're juggling, right? And then on top of it, you've got to figure out, okay, now I have all these people that are nothing like me. I can't even necessarily relate to them because we have such different experiences. So that's a lot. And I want leaders, especially those that are listening right now, we know that's a lot. And so how do you manage all of that? Because your average leader wants to be a fantastic leader. They want to be the ones that people are in their industry talking about, oh man, I want to work for Eddie. Like Eddie Zick, you work for Eddie. That's amazing because I hear he's awesome. He grows people. He's challenging you all the time. Like we all want to be that leader that everybody's knocking down doors to work for. But when the reality is that there's so much going on, you can barely keep your head above water. You're probably not growing your people, developing your people, doing one-on-one coaching sessions, thanking them for you're not doing all the basics, right? Because you're just trying to keep your head afloat and make sure the board's happy, the stockholders are happy, your boss is happy. So it's just a lot. So the way that I structured the book is really just to break it down in its simplest way. And that's why I spend so much time in stories. The stories will actually help people see how either I got it incredibly wrong, right? or how I knocked it out the park. And in hopes that, they can find a story that relates to them. The goal isn't that you have to change who you are. And that's really because I think people start getting overwhelmed with, oh my God, now how am I going to lead this person? I know nothing about their history. Nobody's expecting you to know anything about their history or, whatever their life's traumas could be. It doesn't do anybody any good to beat people up because they really don't know, right? Like nobody wins in that scenario. But what you can do is you certainly can ask the questions, listen, learn. And then now that you know more information, there's different opportunities for you to be able to take action. And so that's the biggest thing I want people to know is, we're not looking for, I'm not here to, let me go there, right, on this particular subject. Not here to beat up the white guy, right? I feel like a lot of the conversation has not been, I wanted the conversation to go deeper and wider. And so far, a lot of the conversation has been, for white men, because they still control about 87% of the leadership positions in corporate America. So a lot of the conversation has been, okay, let's help white men know how to lead people of color and women. Yeah, okay, that's helpful, right? And so that's part of the book, but we're way past that at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's more women that are leading. If you're a person of color, now all of a sudden you're leading somebody that doesn't look like you. How does that work, right? So it's not just a one, way that we figured out with male allies. That's why they named the book that. It's like, no, every leader has to figure this out. And so you've got to know how to lead. I always say you got to know how to lead all God's children, every race, every creed, every gender. That's, if you want to remain relevant in the 21st century, that is the requirement for leaders these days. So yes, the book tells you different ways on how to do that, but we kind of engulf it with stories so that it's digestible and bite-sized fun pieces.
That's excellent. And it's so important, as you mentioned, because the traditional way of leading, because you have these 5 different generations in the workforce that didn't exist before, and the societal norms, the societal mores, a lot of things have changed.
Yeah.
You can't use that same model that we learned in yesteryear. So
That's
I
right.
love the fact that you've produced this manual that can run, give folks something to run through and to think about this differently, and this set of stories that I'm sure we'll find ourselves in one of those scenarios in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. It's interesting too, because some of the stories may be, some stories I don't even tell the answer because I want people to see what I actually ask the question, how would you have handled it? Right. So people can really think through it. Because again, it's really about putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to see the world from their perspective for a second. And most of us don't do that because we're so busy running around, right? So it's like, but no, this is how we start to make the change that we actually all desperately want to see. But we got to start the food chain, right?
Indeed, we really do.
Yeah.
Now, you make a great point, Stephanie, in the fact that, hey, the only reason the initial target was we were addressing white men was not to pick on anybody, but it's just that, hey, that's where the center of power has been.
Right.
I think the stat uses 87% of the positions in higher authority are still controlled by that demographic. Now, you, as you mentioned, you're a Black woman. You come from a different background in terms of who you work around, and then even marriage and such. Anytime you're the first in anything, but especially as a Black person, you've gone through something. It wasn't easy. It wasn't handed to you. There's been some pain, some scars along the way. So I applaud you of being the first Black woman to lead an aviation company.
Thank you.
What comes with that? It's often bittersweet. Hey, I'm the first, but boy, oh boy, let me tell you. So you may not be able to tell us some of the things that came with it, but what's just one of the lessons you've learned that you're able to pass on to other leaders?
Well, it's such a great question. And yes, and I think this is true for anybody who's ever been a first, yourself included. There's always the stories that we usually don't tell, right? Because you tell the stories, but you don't tell the stories that are gonna really make people go like, oh my God, I didn't realize that. And plus, usually you don't have that kind of time. There's so many stories that will shock people, so you just kind of narrow it down to a few. What I will tell you is this: when I grew up around planes because I was a military kid, right? My dad was in the Air Force. And so when you're in the military, at least it was my experience, that in the military, all the kids that I grew up around, I moved every 2 years of my life, we all had the same lifestyle. And so I didn't know anything different, and neither did anybody that I was around, right? Because we all moved around all the time. And in the military, it was a lot more about, are you a civilian or are you in the military? And less about, are you Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, right? Because so many of us were so many different races. And so that kind of had an impact on how I saw the world, if you will. Now, fast forward, get into the workplace, and especially the private aviation side of the house, because that is, the people who tend to fly privately or work in the industry, because it's getting your pilot's license and all that stuff is an expensive hobby. So historically, it was always, primarily men, and specifically white men, and a lot of times men who had a background in the military. And so it was a very specific type of demographic. What I would tell you is probably some of the biggest lessons that I learned is when I remember I had to take over my very first sales team. and my CEO had asked me to come over and take over the team. And originally I said no, because I was already overseeing a sales team and I loved that team. And it took me 5 years to get the team where I needed it to be. And so the team and I were like just vibing everything. We were killing it on the numbers. The team had a great team culture. They worked really well as a team. And so then I was asked to like leave that and come to this other division where none of that was were going on. And so I remember, for 4 months going, no, I'm good. Like, thank you. I'm just going to stay where I am. And my CEO wasn't having it. He's like, Steph, I need you to come over here and fix this team like you did the other team. And, let's stop talking about it. You just need to be here in the next 30 days. And so I actually talk about that in the book, because I opened with that story that all of a sudden, here's a Black woman who I've, come through the ranks, right? But certainly I was not a pilot, which is how most people came through the ranks. I didn't know, I wasn't maintenance. I didn't know how to fix a plane. I don't know how to fix a plane or fly a plane. Okay. And that's usually how people who are leading in the private jet sector, they come from one of those two. So I remember when I moved down and took over this team, and I'm looking at this all male team, and they all had the same background. Not only were they the same race, same gender, they all had the same military background. And here I'm looking at them thinking, wow, like, we could not be further from each other. And they're looking at me like, where'd she come from? Right? Like, who's this lady? And so, and this team had never, ever hit their number, which is why I was brought in to get this, get this whole house in order, if you will. But after the first year, the team hit their number for the first time. They'd never hit their number in 14 years. And the reason why I give that story is because that's how I learned: ask, listen, learn, and then you take action. So it wasn't that the team was no good. These people were highly trained, very effective, especially in the background that they had, which were all military type of backgrounds. They just didn't work together as a team. And so that's where, the ally had to come into play. I had to understand them and their background, and they had to understand me and what was I expecting as well. And then together, I earned the right to be able to be called their ally. But what I would say, the lessons that I learned in that process was not to judge a book by its cover. Just because I had no background, zero similarities with them, didn't mean that I couldn't lead them. So that was the first thing I had to get out of my own head, if you will. I knew how to lead an effective team, though these people were nothing like me, and I'm sure they felt like I was nothing like them. So that was one of the lessons I had to learn. I also had to deal with customers who would look at me. I remember this one specific time. We had an event. The event was at Pebble Beach. And so, so I'm the lead person at the event. We're hosting all high net worth customers. And this gentleman, my sales director, introduces me to this client. The client says to me, he's looking at me up and down, and he goes, wow, so you're in charge? And you could tell the look on his face, said it all, right? Like,
yes.
And he kept saying, so wait, so wow. Like, he literally was like, this went off like 2 minutes. Wow, so you're in charge, huh? And then he said, you must be really, really, really good if you're in charge.
Isn't that something?
Isn't that something? Now, in his world, he's thinking he's paying me a compliment. There's no compliment in that, right? And so that's just one of many stories that I could.
Because we understand everything that wasn't said.
That's right, exactly. Because his body language is screaming it, right? And so you still have to, keep his dignity intact. You still have to, deal with all of that. And so I remember when he said that, I, put my hand forward, shook his hand, and I said, yes, I'm Stephanie Chung. I am in charge. And yes, I am really, really, really good. You know what I mean? Like, I got to address it.
And I can hear the silent snaps right there. There you go.
Exactly. And then, what happened at that point? He looked at me and he put a grin on his face and he goes, well, it's a damn good pleasure to meet you, Stephanie Chung, right? And then, every day there was something that I was like, all right, how am I going to handle this? And because you know what you want to say,
but right? Yeah, that's the reality.
But you can't. And let's just say, I always believe that a lot of times that kind of we'll call it ignorance, because I can't come up with another word. He wasn't trying to be rude, right? And he wasn't trying to be mean, but that was his reality. He had never seen anybody like me before in that level of a position in that type of industry. Now, the truth was there was no one at that time like me before in that industry at that level. And so I was his first to see. But that happened so often, all the time. And yet, you have decisions to make as the leader, as the person, in my case, person of color, woman, etc. How am I going to handle this and still be true to my brand? Right. And that's really, a lot of times we forget about that. There's the brand that you work for, and then there's the brand of your own brand. And how do I want my brand to carry itself? And so that's usually my driving force of how I will respond or not respond when I get those types of looks or questions.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. We had a listener tune in and comment earlier from LinkedIn, and now we have CJ Advocates from Facebook. She says this.
Thank you, CJ.
Then she went on just to add that this is a great conversation. I am getting some good nuggets.
Nice.
And she did ask one question that I'd like to go ahead and tee over to you.
Okay.
Who really is responsible for team culture, the CEO or the supervisor?
Fantastic question. Fantastic question. So in my opinion, it's the CEO. The CEO has to set the vision for what this culture is going to be. Now, it gets executed down line, right? So supervisors, VPs, et cetera. Just like anything else, if you think about business overall, it's the CEO's vision that everybody's trying to bring to life, right? The CEO should always be focused on the future. His or her direct reports now have to make sure that they have the plan, the structure, the process to make that vision be able to be executable. And then below that now is the managers, the directors, the senior directors. They're the ones dealing with the, okay, now we understand where we're trying to go. What are the people, the process that we need to do in order to make the vision of the CEO's stuff come to life? And then you've got the worker bees, right? And the worker bees are dealing with the realities of what's happening in the process, the people every single day by day, minute by minute. So each level has a role. But to answer CJ's question, it literally all has to start at the top. If it doesn't start at the top, it will not happen. You can't have one division has a certain culture, one team has a different culture. You can't have all that, right? Because then you're not all walking in accordance to what it is that you're trying to get accomplished as a company. That's why when I talked about you have to assure alignment, that's one of those examples of assuring alignment. Everybody has to know what the right hands do and why are we here? What does the business exist for? What's the purpose behind the business? And how is it that what I do impacts what we do as a company? All that has to be literally directed from the CEO of what they will and will not tolerate in regards to setting the culture that everybody feels seen, appreciated, psychologically safe, and therefore can do their best work. So.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for that answer. And she's letting us know her name. So I guess the first name is the business. So her name is Shania Johnson. I know Shania. She's a lobbyist, I believe, in DC. She
Nice.
says, yes, thank you. She waited again and she said, absolutely, 100%. Then she says, what should be music to your ears? She wants the book and wants to listen to more of this conversation.
Oh, wonderful.
And she has one last request. Does she do executive coaching?
Oh, you know what? What a blessing. So first of all, it's funny. I used to do executive coaching. And Eddie, when you and I first met, that was a big part of my business. Now I'm on the road so much that I can't be an effective one-on-one coach. And so I no longer do executive coaching any longer. But CJ, thank you so much. And what I would do is tell CJ, by all means, feel free to follow me or sign up, because I am going to start doing some things like more mastermind focus. That will be in the future, but at least if she's on, on our radar, then she'll be the first to be notified when that program actually comes into fruition. We're actually creating it and talking through it and working on it right now. So I don't do one-on-one coaching anymore, but I am trying to be able to do more masterminds for small groups, not big, massive stuff, just smaller groups that we can fit that into the schedule. So her time is actually really perfect.
She says, awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, masterminds are awesome. And those are a great way, especially for busy executives like yourself, to be able to give yourself to a group of people at the same time rather than one-on-one time slots.
Right,
well,
right.
I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for what you shared. What's the biggest lesson that you'd like, Stephanie, to make sure everybody walks with this conversation with?
That's a good question. There's probably two, right? So one of the things that I heard, and I actually heard this but probably like, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, from Carla Harris. She's the originator of this quote, but I quote it all the time because I still think it's effective now. That any major decision that's going to be made about your career, you will not be in the room. And I think that's always important for every leader to always remember that when people are, I come from the C-suite, right? So when we're talking about who should we give this next project to, or who should we give, the international assignment to, and so on and so forth, all of those discussions, you won't be in the room if your name's being discussed. And so what that means then is that your brand, I made a reference to, your personal brand has to represent you and be able to be the forerunner, because many times you won't be in the room. And so we as professionals don't usually think about our personal brand. We tend to think about the brand that we work for. So I would say for all of the listeners is to always be mindful of, what do you want your personal brand to represent? When people are talking about it or thinking about it, what is it, right? And that's what you're doing every single day to make sure that what you're doing lines up to your personal brand, which should line up to your personal values and your purpose and why you're here. And so that would be the first set of advice I would say. Second set of advice I would say is this: as leaders, to be relevant, and I said this earlier, and to be effective, you are going to have to realize that just because someone's not like you doesn't mean that you can just stick your head in the sand and hope that they go away, right? That's not happening. Nobody's going away, right? Can't ignore this. Those days are dead. And so if you want to be that leader that really does hit your highest potential, then you're going to have to really buckle down and figure out, how do you lead people who are not like you? It's not a nice to do, or maybe I try it if I have time. You'll never have time. Now is the time. And so as the world is changing so rapidly, this is the new level of leadership, period. And you have to get on board. And there's no ands, ifs, or doubts about it. And so there's a whole movement happening. One of the things, if I could just say this, Eddie, when I wrote the book, I had a lot of beta readers read the book, and I had a lot of different types of people read the book. And one of the things I was pleasantly surprised to see, that a lot of the white male executives that read the book, they don't even know each other. So they would come back to me with all the answers to the questions that I gave them. But they all had the same message. They said, Steph, you're really onto something with this book. Whatever you do, don't make it a one-off book, make it a movement, because this is what's needed for today's leaders. Now, this is coming from white men, right? And so I remember when I said, when you read the book, how did you feel? They said, I felt like you made me think. There are times I felt a little uncomfortable. And I said, did you ever feel mad? Right? Because that wasn't the goal behind it. And they said, no, never felt mad. And if there were times that I feel like, then you would swipe in and talk about your vulnerabilities, or where you missed the mark, or, the lessons that you learned. And so I use that as an example because the book is for everybody, right? I don't ignore the elephant in the room that, yes, white men control most of the leadership positions now, but the conversation has to go deeper and wider than that. And so this is really for every leader. And so the one message I really want for leaders to grab hold of is, if you want to hit your highest potential, whatever that is for you, you're going to have to deal with this issue. And whether it's a different generation, different gender, different sexual orientation, different religion, whatever, different. We're in a global world and a global economy. And so you're going to have to get a lot more educated about, how do you do this and do this effectively, if you want to be able to have the honor of leading a lot of people. So that's the message I would leave with everybody.
What a powerful message. And I'm so happy to have had you again, my friend. Thank you so much for being a guest. And I want to make sure that people know to go out and get a copy of this book, where books are sold, and to learn more about you, that they should make it over to stephaniechung.com. Find out more about the work she's doing. Book her as a speaker for your next big event. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Of course. This was so fun. Thank you so much, Eddie. It was nice seeing you again.
It was my honor. And thank you for listening. That concludes this episode of the Keep Leading Podcast, everyone. I'm Eddie Turner, the Leadership Accelerator, reminding you that leadership is not about our title or our position. Leadership, as Stephanie brought out so well for us today, is action. It's an activity. It's not a garment that we put on and take off. We must be a leader at our core and allow it to emanate in all that we do. So whatever you're doing, always keep leading.